Is your staff quiet quitting or are they whisper working? It's super important that you understand the difference.
This is The Rare Advisor, proud to be a part of the Advisor Advancement Network and home of a business model supercharged by recurring and repeatable events. Your host is Mike Walters, CEO of USA Financial. He is an investment advisor representative of, and securities are offered through USA Financial Securities, member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor.
High possibility that you've heard of quiet quitting. Very low possibility that you've heard of whisper working. The main reason being, I made up whisper working, but it is a real thing. So, quiet quitting, let's start there. First of all, it's just another byproduct out of the pandemic and combination with remote work. So, quiet quitting is being defined in many different ways. And there are actually good aspects to it. I'll talk to you about that in a moment. It's what I've called whisper working. But there is also the majority of quiet quitting that is absolute horseshit. And it is a negative not only to the company, but it is a negative to the individual and the future of their career and their ability to generate income and to support the lifestyle that they would desire for themselves or their family. So it's a cancerous concept. But nonetheless, it is a concept that's out there and it's getting a lot of traction in social media these days. And the concept is that quiet quitting simply means I'm going to do the bare bones minimum to get by. Now, in some instances, some people think, well, what that means is, instead of working a 60-hour week, I'm going to work the 40 hours that I'm actually paid for. And honestly, that's pretty legit. Now, you still want to lean forward. You want to lean into that role so that you're creating value for your employer. So they want to promote you. They want to pay more for you. And if they're getting a good return on investment with the time they're buying from you, then they're willing to reinvest back in you to maximize that and create more and more momentum for you and your career moving forward. But the other side of that is the hidden concept of all the other issues you've heard about as it relates to remote work and or now hybrid work. And that is the dangers, the pitfalls, the fact that some people simply are very unproductive when they're not in a business environment. Maybe they're unproductive in a business environment as well, for that matter. But that's a whole nother conversation. So let's just say they're normally very productive, but now in the remote environment, likely in their home, they're unproductive. They're not as successful in their role working from that offsite location. Maybe there's too many distractions. Maybe the kids are there. Maybe they're set up shop in the kitchen, or in the family room or living room. They don't have a separate section of the house. Maybe the rest of the family doesn't honor or respect the fact that they're working from home, just like if they were working from the office. That is the same work and it deserves the same amount of respect. So they don't, they're potentially barging in and interrupting and asking for little things throughout the day that just keeps sidetracking this person. So that's possible. The other part, which is even the bigger problem of quiet quitting, is the concept that I'm going to do as little as I can to stay under radar, to try to avoid any scrutiny from the company and hope that I can get paid for more than what I'm doing. So the worst underbelly of this whole quiet quitting concept, and you can find this out on social media, are individuals who are bragging up the idea that they're working 3 or 4 hours, but getting paid for working 8 hours. Or I've even seen some are bragging about they have 2 and 3 jobs, all of which are supposedly full-time jobs, 40 hours a week type stuff, but they're really only working 25 or 30% a day on each one. So they're getting paid full time on 3 jobs, but really only working full time in total as if it was 1 job. So there's a lot going on there. So keep in mind, the simple answer is quiet quitting is stealing, because the individual is selling their time and expertise in return for money, for a paycheck. So if they're not using their time and expertise appropriately when they're on the clock, then they're in fact stealing. And this like just goes into so many different dominoes, right? So just one to get your mind rolling. So this is a chart that just recently came out. This was in The Hustle, and it's talking about in-app time per day and how it's just been exploding. So what they're saying here is in Q2 of 2022, they took these 6 apps and they identified what is the average amount of time per day that each person who has an account in these apps is actively using those apps. TikTok won the day at 95 minutes per day on average per user. Then was YouTube at 74 minutes a day, Instagram at 51, Facebook at 49, Twitter at 29, and Snapchat at 20. Now, I understand that not everybody uses all these apps. Obviously, I don't use, hardly any of those apps. I guess I use YouTube. That's about it. So I don't really use this stuff, but there are some people who use all of it. So let's just assume worst case scenario. Let's say somebody uses all these apps and they're an average user on each and every one of these platforms. Well, if I add up all those minutes, the 95, 74, 51, 49, 29, 21, that's 319 minutes per day that they're on that app, those apps. So that's 5 hours and 19 minutes a day. I would imagine that person might be one of the same people who's talking about or executing upon quiet quitting. Because in order to free up almost 5.5 hours from the average person's day to spend your time with your nose and your eyeballs in an app, probably not a very productive individual. Now, multiply that out though, and it gets really scary. In a 5-day work week, that is 26 hours and 35 minutes. That's over a day out of a 5-day work week spent on apps. A 24-hour day, not a work day, a 24-hour day. Over a 7-day calendar week, you're talking about over 37 hours, about a day and a half, greater than a day and a half worth of time. What about a 30-day calendar month? 30-day calendar month, we're talking over 6.5 days a month, 24-hour days stuck inside these apps. And then finally, if we project it out over a whole calendar year, 365 days, you're talking about 80.5 full 24-hour days spent inside an application. Not very productive people. Now let's flip it the other way. Is there a good side to quiet quitting? I'll argue there is. The problem is it's being labeled the same, so you have to dissect the two apart. I'll call it whisper working, just because I'm very creative with my names that I make up. Just kidding. But anyway, whisper working. When you're looking at whisper working, the concept is what happens from a productivity standpoint before you have a planned absence. You're going on vacation, or for whatever other reason you're going to be gone. So let's just say you're going to be gone next week. Most people end up having an unbelievably productive week the week before their vacation, or an unbelievably productive day or two before they're out of the office for a day or two. That's because they're leaning into it. That's because they know they have to plan ahead, and suddenly they're running a sprint on that day. So what I try to do for myself is I am a marathoner, I guess you could say, because I've been doing this for a really long time. But the reality is I'd rather run 5 sprints a week than run 1 marathon a week. So I don't work 12 and 15 hours a day like I did 30 years ago. I work a normal 8, sometimes maybe let's call it 10 hours a day, but I run it in a sprint and then another sprint and then another sprint. My concept being I'm whisper working. I'm trying to get as much done as I can to set myself up for the next day, the next week, the next month, or even the next year. Why do I call it whisper working? Because that's what ties into remote. That's what ties into hybrid. The people who are super productive in a hybrid environment or a remote environment, they're productive because they're not being disturbed. It's quiet. They can whisper work and they can get a boatload done. But you need to manage that. And that's why hybrid has become the new thing. Because there are times when you need to be with your team, you need to be with your staff, you need to be with your group to be creative and solve problems and work on projects. So it's a matter of combining that together. So when you're talking to your staff, when you're working with and building your team, we don't want quiet quitters. We want to get them the heck out of the organization. But we'll take a lot of whisper workers, and that's what you have to understand. That's the difference. So there's a lot of media out there. Here's the Wall Street Journal, two articles on 2 different days. If your coworkers are quiet quitting, here's what that means. Because a lot of people don't even understand what it is. And again, there's some good things to it, some bad things. I'll call the good things that whisper working. I'll stick with quiet quitting as the negative term. And then the backlash against quiet quitting is getting very loud. And there's a whole article just talking about that. And it's for the reasons we're discussing here today. So if you understand those 2 things, you manage your staff towards that, you'll actually create a very successful environment in a hybrid or a remote environment, understanding you don't want the quiet quitters, but you'll take all the whisper workers you can get.
This information is for licensed financial professionals only and is not intended for use in soliciting sales from the public. The views expressed represent the opinions of the presenter or their featured guest, not necessarily those of USA Financial or its affiliated subsidiaries. Industry references are generic and not intended to represent actions or beliefs of any individual or entity. Content is only presented to illustrate general principles, beliefs, or ideas and should not be construed as legal or regulatory advice. Trademark and copyright protected. USA Financial and Affiliates.